and indeed one of the most requested guests, and one of the guests that some of you love to hate, but some of you love to love, is David Icke. Now, the newspapers, and I always say this at the beginning of podcasts that we've done together, and, you know, David's listening to this on the Isle of Wight. We're about to speak to him. He's not going to mind. But the newspapers used to call David Icke the potty prophet. He was the man that the media loved to have a laugh at. If he was wearing purple shell suits or whatever, there'd be a photograph there. If somebody had claimed, or he'd claimed, that he was the son of Jesus, that would make a headline, and I think it did once. He can confirm that. But something's happened over the last, I would say, 10, maybe 15 years with David. More and more people are starting to take David seriously. And David's message has not really wavered by a quaver. He's been there and a constant for pretty much a quarter of a century or more. I'm doing an awful lot of talking now, and I want to get into this conversation with David Icke. David, thank you very much for coming on.
Pleasure, Howard.
What did you make of anything I said there?
Well, I heard it all before, of course, because after 30 years you do. But yeah, I mean, things have changed, and I think one of the main things that has changed is that people are actually looking at what I'm saying rather than just getting their perception of me from one-liners in the newspapers. And, you know, people do themselves a great disservice, and they basically disrespect themselves if they make judgments about people and situations without actually checking it out. And I was talking to a journalist this week who was interviewing me for a national newspaper, a freelance, and he'd pitched the story to another newspaper, and the commissioning editor had said, "We're not having him in the paper, he's mentally ill." And of course, what that guy sitting in his little bubble knew about me was only what he'd heard in the same industry or from the same industry that he works in. So he's just had the same mantra for decades, and he's believed it. And what people are seeing now, when they actually take the trouble to see what I'm saying and how I'm saying it, and the evidence in the books that I have to support it, is, hold on a minute, this is making more sense than how I saw the world before. So this is the process that's happening. And, you know, we've talked a couple of times, Howard, since I started a world speaking tour in the summer of 2016. It's continuing now. I'm going to Dublin next week or next Friday, and then all across Europe, and then across the UK before December. And I've never seen anything like it. All over the world, literally, Australia, Europe, the Balkans, Scandinavia, America, Canada, people are starting to look at concepts and information and possibilities that they would have waved away with a wave of the hand before.
But David, it's not a completely open door, though, is it? One of the last times that we talked, you were having trouble getting into Australia. They were not going to let you in. Clearly that problem resolved itself, but they had issues with you.
Well, a number of people have issues with me and in authority. And so here's a question, Howard, that these people, Ike's a nutter, should actually ask themselves. Why would authorities have a problem with an apparent nutter who's talking nonsense from speaking in their country or entering their country? Why would they? And by the way, you know, we're talking here about the response to me by the media over the decades in Britain. But when I go to places, for instance, like Serbia or Slovakia or other countries, in the Balkans and into Europe, I'm interviewed on their mainstream programs. I was in Belgrade being interviewed for 25 minutes, seriously, about world events on their two main breakfast shows.
Well, listen, I know this for a fact, and I see some of these videos on YouTube. The problem that you've got here, and perhaps other English-speaking countries... Well, look,
Howard, I don't have a problem. I don't have a problem.
Well, the issue that you have here...
All right. for something about, a program called The Unexplained, this is a very, very important point.
Well,
I don't have a problem. I am putting out information that people will not hear in the mainstream. I don't have a problem because I don't care how people receive it. I care about the fact that it's circulating. So if people have a problem with me, I say to them, well, you've actually described it perfectly. You have a problem with me. I have no problem with me.
All right, let's park the word problem, and let's say the issue that maybe you have here. And just hear me out with this point, is that you have a back catalogue. You have a history here. People go back to that interview with Terry Wogan that you did. The one that you did 20 years later was very different, we have to say. But they go back to that. They go back to you wearing shell suits. They go back to headlines saying, and I think, I haven't got it with me right now, but wasn't there some claim that somebody around you or you had said that you were the son or a son of God or something like that? And all of that stuff, of course, pollutes the way that you're seen. Now, when you go to places where they don't have that background with you, of course, in this day and age where people have more sources coming into them and they might be a little more open-minded, you're going to get more of a hearing, I would have thought.
Yeah, but you do have that background because it's all over the internet, and people can access that stuff. But this is the question. At that time you're talking about, which was a period of 3 months in 66 years of my life, I was going through a massive transformation. It was like spending your life in a bubble of perception, a bubble of possibility, a bubble of information. And there's a big backstory to it, how it came about. And then someone burst the bubble. And for 3 months, I'm trying to cope and process this information that's hitting me from all angles on multiple levels. It's a long story. It's a simple story, but it's a long story. So are people going to live, and again, this is not my problem, it's theirs, are they going to live their entire life in a time warp? Are they going to judge someone's 66 years from 3 months? Well, if they are, they have a problem. I don't have a problem with it at all because I don't care. But they have a problem because if their perception is that you judge a person for what happened 30 years ago for 3 months against 66 years, and all that I've said since and written since has been proved to be true, then what the heck else are they perceiving in the world about world events, about people, about everything that is coming from the same myopia? And therefore, how can they possibly, from that way of perceiving the world, understand anything? They can't. And what is happening now is that people's perceptions of everything are being molded, because from perception comes all human behavior, and human perception comes from information received. So if you can control the information that people receive, you dictate their perceptions, and therefore you dictate their behavior. And what we're seeing now is this incessant censorship in all areas, not least through the internet giants in the devil's playground, Silicon Valley, that is dictating what people see and hear, and thus what they perceive,
but
and thus how they behave.
If people were controlled in that way, though, David...
I'm trying to break that.
And no, I totally understand what you're saying. You know that you and I have spoken many times before, so I know which page you're on, and, we've been here before. But... the fact of the matter is that people are going, and your shows, your speaking engagements are pretty much a lot of the time sold out, maybe all of the time sold out, David. So you can't say that people are controlled to that extent because they're coming to see you. If they were totally controlled, they wouldn't be coming to see you.
Oh, it's about numbers, mate. If you could see the difference it makes in the way people start to see the world in a different way, in a more expanded way, when they have access to this information compared with when they don't, the more that this information circulates. This is basically what's happened to me. As the information has circulated as best I can, nothing like it circulates when it goes through the mainstream, the more people have changed their perception of me and changed their perception of the world. And if we had a mainstream media that would allow all information and perceptions and, if you like, ways of looking at the world to be circulated, then the world would be a very different place. But, it's a very, very narrow band of possibility, what I call the postage stamp consensus, that the mainstream media overwhelmingly pour out and pound out to the world as news and information every day. And the vast majority of people don't get access to this other information. You look at the education system. That's the postage stamp consensus version of the world that's given to children from the earliest age throughout their formative years. And if they don't repeat back what they've been told to believe in their exams, they don't pass.
Well, we've got to have some standards, though, David. Come on now. You've got to. I mean, did you get your A-levels? You took A-levels, didn't you, David?
I never.
You didn't?
Howard.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
I should have researched that bit then. You didn't take A-levels. No,
you've actually by accident introduced a very interesting point, a very important point. I left school at 15. You could in those days to go and play professional football. I never took, let alone passed, a major exam apart from an end of year class exam in my life. I did all my learning in my time, on my watch, on my terms. I've now written something like 25 books. I talk for 10 hours all day with no script. I would have been considered at 15 an educational failure. There's this idea that you have to pass exams to give a measure of your intelligence is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, because not everybody. I mean, I remember now. Of course, you left school at 15, and you've achieved a massive amount. Of course, I mean, in sport, as a mainstream sports correspondent on the telly, and all the great things that you did, and all of this that you've done in the last 25 years, whatever. But the fact of the matter is that not everybody is going to be as motivated as a David Icke. So when you say that kids shouldn't be as tramlined in education, we had this debate on the last podcast we did. But when you say kids shouldn't be as tramlined by the education system as they are, a lot of kids just don't have the motivation that some have. I had it because I wanted to do this. You had it because you wanted to do all the great things that you've done. But, we are a minority. You've got to have some control, haven't you?
Hold on a second. So the next question that comes from that, if what you say is true, is why are there so many what you call unmotivated young people in the world? Why? I mean, I'll tell you one reason why. The education system, as it currently operates and as it's currently delivers its information, is deeply, deeply boring to most kids. It doesn't inspire them. And when they leave school, they are, or whenever they leave their education, they are so sick of being bored day after day, and they therefore equate being bored with being educated and learning, and they just stop doing it for the rest of their lives. When really, there's a vast, amazing world beyond the myopic bounds of the postage stamp consensus version of everything, the mainstream everything, to be explored. And we should be inspiring kids, not boring them to death. What are we doing? For instance, algebra. Right? If you want to learn algebra, because you need algebra, then learn algebra when you need to learn algebra. You've got kids who are sitting at desks. Look at this summer on incredibly hot, lovely days when they could be climbing trees, when they could be pursuing their own interests. And what are they doing? They're sitting at a desk learning algebra. What does X equal? I don't care less. You make it equal what you like, whatever makes it happy, but just leave me alone.
Yeah, but my maths teacher would have said, I hated, loathed and detested algebra, but my maths teacher would have said to me, the point of algebra is not doing those stupid sums with letters and numbers, which, a lot of people still have to do. It's to teach you methodical thought. If we're not educating kids in that way, how are they going to think?
Hold on a second. No. I tell you the thought processes that are not taught: critical thought, critical thinking, questioning everything to see if it stands up to scrutiny, instead of accepting it and not questioning it because it's come from authority, because it's come from some academic with letters after his name, because it's come from some scientist who a little way down the road will be proved to be mistaken. It's critical thinking that we need. Once people question things, once young people are encouraged to question things, they go through their life questioning things. Therefore, when a politician says something, instead of accepting it, they question it. When a scientist says something, given the history that scientists have been saying things for hundreds of years that have turned out to not to be true, they question it. This is what we need, a critically thinking, questioning population. What any system of control doesn't want is a critically thinking, questioning population. And what we have now, Howard, and it is coming in so fast every day, is critical thinking and having alternative opinions and questioning what authority tells you, becoming more and more suppressed and oppressed, and people being intimidated into not doing it.
All right, let's park it there because we've got to take some commercials right now, David. So we're going to park it. When we've done the podcast, we can run right through, but we're going to take some commercials right now. And I think we need a couple of minutes anyway just to refine our thoughts about that. But the one thing, and I'm talking to my listener here now, that David Icke lovers and David Icke haters can agree on, I think, is that the man we've got on here now is a man who made a lot of people start to question and put stuff out into the mainstream or the peripheries of the mainstream that, while you may be outraged by it and not agree with it, it made you think. Isn't that a good thing? I'm not here saying it is, because it's not my job to say it is or it's not. I'm asking you to ask that question. David Icke will be back, so will I, in just a second here on The Unexplained at Talk Radio. The Unexplained at Talk Radio, David Icke is in the middle of a big speaking tour. It's Dublin next week, but it's always somewhere else, whether it's Australia. They love him in the United States, lots of fans there. And of course here, where he packs out theatres and venues up and down the country. We talked, David, about this idea of free speech. Do you agree with me that there are some ideas and notions that don't deserve the oxygen of free speech? If you look, for example, at, and I'm sure you know him, I'm not sure what you make of him. He's been on this show a long time ago, and all he did was shout at me. But Alex Jones, the so-called conspiracy theory broadcaster, has made a string of outrageous and unsubstantiated claims that have brought him into conflict with an awful lot of people now, and some aspects of the electronic media, the modern media, the social media, are in the process of closing him down now for some of those things. I guess you would agree with me that there are some notions and ideas that are perhaps beyond the pale. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that Alex Jones should be turned off. That's a matter for other people. He's doing his job and people are listening to him. That's not what I'm saying. But there are some ideas perhaps that don't deserve to be heard. And here you are saying free speech, total free speech.
No, I don't agree that anything shouldn't be heard. If you, for instance, have a situation where you are urging people to burn a house down, or you're urging people to do something to do with terrorism, there are laws against that. There are laws against that incitement. There are laws against inciting violence. My point is this: once you start censoring what people can say before the point of delivery, you are by definition giving an authority the power to say what people can and cannot hear. If people have a problem with someone saying something, then argue your point, put out information to show that they're talking nonsense. But once you start saying this is not acceptable, therefore we're going to stop anyone hearing it, that is a tyranny. That is what the Nazis did when they burned the books. What we have now is digital book burning through people like Google and Facebook. Any tyranny that comes to power, be it far left, far right, or far anything, immediately it has the power to do so, wants to close down all information that challenges its narrative, all information that exposes the truth about what it's doing and what's behind it. And therefore, if we're going to have a free society, and we're going to talk about free speech, then we have free speech, because if anyone doesn't have free speech, no one has it, because what is left is only the freedom to conform, not the freedom to speak your truth. And any sane and also mature society should be at peace with having people say what they think, whatever it is, then arguing against it, and of course having laws that say you cannot incite violence with your speech without consequence, you cannot do this, attack on this person with your speech to do them, to encourage people to do them harm without consequence. But once you start censoring speech before the point of delivery, then you are going down a very dark road. And what we're seeing, Howard, now is what happens when you do that. Because you first of all say, you cannot incite violence, therefore we're going to stop you doing that by preventing your what you say circulating. Okay, and people then say, well, in very large numbers say, well, that's fair enough. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, but that's only the thin end of the wedge. We've started now. And then, oh, no, you can't say that. And then you can't say that. And then you can't say that. And we've now reached a point in this process, which is always the process. Just read the methodology of Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister, and you'll see that what's playing out now is actually exactly the techniques that he advocated and pursued in Nazi Germany. So we've reached the point now where you can't say this about this gender, you can't say this about this group, you can't say this about this, can't say this about that. And what's happening is they're being picked off and picked off and picked off, which is exactly, again, the process described in 1984 by George Orwell.
But the norms of society constantly change. What is acceptable? Things that were said on things that were said on comedy shows. Hang on, let me finish the point, and then we'll get there. But things that were said on comedy shows in the 1970s, which I was watching with my parents, you quite rightly could not utter these days. Why? Because we're more enlightened. We are constantly moving forward. You can't just have everything out there, because you have a less enlightened society, and hopefully we are becoming better. I mean, if you look back to the dark ages in this country, if you stole a loaf of bread, they'd probably hang you. We're a bit more enlightened than that these days. Things constantly change, don't they?
But we're talking about freedom of speech and freedom of expression. We're not talking about, putting someone in jail for stealing a loaf. And if people don't want to hear it, then they won't. Then the whole thing will die out anyway, because no one will be interested. And if it's nonsense, then people can come along in the public arena and show with evidence and information that it's nonsense. Again, once you cross this line of censorship before the point of delivery, you are going down a very, very dark road. And we are going down that road now very, very fast, where there's less and less and less and less that you can actually say without, it doesn't circulate because the algorithms stop it, or the ghost banning on the internet, which I'm subject to, where you can actually post it, but the algorithms make sure it doesn't go anywhere. You're going down this road of handing power over the information that people receive or don't receive to some authority, and that authority is getting smaller all the time.
But you said at the beginning of this that there have to be some rules. There are some things that you would consider to be beyond the pale, and of course everybody would consider to be beyond the pale. So somebody has to make the rules.
After the point of delivery.
So in other words, you can put anything out there, and it can subsequently, somebody can take a look at it and adjudicate about it, but it's got to get out there first. That can't always work, can it, David? I mean, some stuff should not be seen, quite rightly.
It's got to get out there first. Otherwise, there's an authority deciding what gets out there and what doesn't. And that authority will do exactly what it's doing now, which is pick off more and more things that we can't say and we can't see and we can't hear. And that road leads to only one place: tyranny. Because that's what tyrannies do. That's the process they do. And, people need to be mature enough to accept that people will have opinions that they won't like and won't agree with. And instead of censoring them, they should argue their case and put out information to show that what's being said is not true. People who are confident of their case don't want to censor anyone with another view because they're confident of their case. Look at what's been thrown at me and the abuse and the lies that have been told about me in the last 30 years by the mainstream media. And I'm the one saying they should not be censored from doing so because of this very clear point. Once you censor before the point of delivery, you are putting power over what people see and hear into the hands of an authority, which will always, as history shows, abuse it.
I understand what you're saying, but what happens if a point is put out there, and you say it should be put out there and then countered with reasoned argument? What happens if the other side, forces in this world are very seldom perfectly balanced. What happens if the other side, the side perhaps putting the correct view or a different view or a view that might change that view that's just been put out that you said shouldn't be censored? What happens if that side is not as strong, doesn't have the same outlets, the same money, the same power? What happens if they don't have that strength that you would want the counter arguments to put? Somebody's got to step in and balance things, haven't they?
Well, hold on a second. Where's the balance now? The official narrative is pounded at what officialdom, what people might call the establishment, whatever, want people to believe. He's pounded out on the mainstream media 24/7. Where's the balance now? Now, why in Nazi Germany could that evil grasp the minds of an entire nation, not necessarily every last person, but massively an entire nation, that led to the catastrophe that followed? Because other voices giving another fix, another angle, another version of what the Nazis were doing and why could not be heard. Why? It was being censored before the point of delivery. And people can argue against this as much as they like, but don't tell me you believe in freedom of speech in its true sense if you believe that anything should be censored before the point of delivery.
Do you feel that you are a man at the moment, as we speak in 2018, when it seems to me that you got more followers than you've had, more supporters than you've had for a very...
Support and interest. I don't want followers.
All right, I knew that word would be a problem. Let's excise that word and just say more support then. You got more support, but you sound like a man who feels as if he's not under threat, but it sounds to me as if you're concerned. You're concerned that somebody out there is trying to close you down.
Oh, well, no, I'm concerned that everyone with another version of reality in whatever way, shape or form is being closed down. And this is not paranoia. This is fact. Look at it. This whole thing with Alex Jones was not about Alex Jones. It's not about whether you love Alex Jones or whether you loathe him or whether you like me or whatever. It's about the freedom of expression. And if Alex Jones is talking nonsense in these areas, then show him to be doing so with evidence, with argument, with debate.
Which, of course, people did do over the Sandy Hook massacre, and he continued to say the things that he was saying.
I just want to prove him wrong then. But what I'm going here, where I'm going here, is you've just said about there must be some balance, and I made the point that there is no balance now. You've got the mainstream media that it pounds out. I mean, there's another quote from Goebbels that said words to the effect of, the idea with the media is to make it ostensibly seem to be varied, while actually it's all the same. And that's exactly what's going on now. And if therefore you're looking at Alex Jones, yes, he has a biggish following, but biggish when compared with what he's doing. Compared with the mainstream media, his following is tiny. Therefore, where's the balance there? And what they're doing now is not creating balance. Okay, we'll hear this version of world events and to balance out what the mainstream media is telling you every day. It's shutting down that alternative way of looking at the world. And not everything Alex Jones, nothing like everything Alex Jones has said over the years has been nonsense. I mean, some of us have been talking about the fact that this whole Middle East series of regime changes was long planned before even the Iraq war. It wasn't a war. It was a Turkish shoot. The Iraq invasion happened in 2003. Now the evidence has come out to show that that is true. But where is anyone in the mainstream saying, actually, these people we call crazy, they were right? There's a story.
Well, I suspect some of them would decisively disagree with what you just said. Listen, you talked a lot every time we've spoken.
Well, of course they would. The bubbles they live in. I mean, they've got no radar of anything.
All right, but every time we've spoken, you've talked about a thing called the totalitarian two-step. Now, I just want to say one thing before.
Totalitarian tiptoe.
Tiptoe. Sorry, two-step. Yeah. Where did I get two-step from? The totalitarian tiptoe. I mean, it was all the T's. The totalitarian tiptoe. Before we get to that, though, you've made a lot of references to Nazi Germany and Goebbels and all the rest of it. You don't honestly think that here in the West, what we call the West, we are heading towards something like Nazi Germany. We are being controlled in that way. Is that what you think?
Well, of course, that's where it's leading. That's what I've been writing about for nearly 30 years, that the plan is to, and has been, to erode and erode and erode freedom, not least freedom of speech, and to centralize and centralize and centralize power and decision-making to the point where we basically have a global version of Nazi Germany. That's where it's meant to conclude. And this is why the propaganda techniques of Goebbels can be shown again and again and again to be the very basis of what is happening now in terms of the deletion of human freedom.
I hear what you say, but I could, if I was alive, which I wasn't in the time of, and I was German and living in the time of Nazi Germany, if I'd stood in the street and said, I think Hitler is wrong and I hate the man, somebody would have put a bullet through my head. If I want to stand up and say, I think the government's completely wrong, they've got it wrong over everything, that's my right. So that's not where we're at, is it?
Oh, well, you've just confused, Howard, where we're at now with what I said about where it was planned to go.
And that's the totalitarian tiptoe.
The totalitarian tiptoe is a name I gave to a technique which is blatantly happening all the time, whereby you're aiming to go to Z and you're at A. And if you go from A to Z in massive leaps, then the change in society will be so big that people might look up from the game show and the sport and say, hold on a minute, what's happening? So you go in as big a steps as you can, but not so big that you alert too many people to the fact that there's a pattern here. People like me I've spent the last 30 years studying and observing the pattern. And that pattern has been to erode and erode and erode and erode more and more freedoms, not least freedom of expression and freedom of opinion and the circulation of alternative information, to the point where there is no alternative information circulating, only what the official narratives are, which is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany when they shut down everyone who wasn't parroting the Nazi line. And that's where it's heading. And you throw artificial intelligence in there with their plan, as they're now openly speaking about, of connecting the human mind to artificial intelligence. And you see what the end game is. It's the end, if you go down that AI road, of the human mind itself, which is why so many
they're telling us that's supposed to be, and I'm skeptical about it. It's supposed to be for our betterment. One quick question before we have to get to more ads. Otherwise, my producer.
They're supposed to be. It's not.
Well, no, I mean, and believe me, we have questioned that many times, including last week on this show, and we will continue to, because there are many, and we can agree on that. There are many unanswered questions about the use of AI, and many things that have to be determined. If we were marching towards, or tiptoeing towards, totalitarianism and a great big global superstate, or whatever it might be, we voted for Brexit. We're supposedly in the process of doing it. If there was no freedom, or not as much freedom as there should be, then we wouldn't have been free to do what we've done, would we?
Oh, blimey. How much time have you got? Because I'll tell you this story, right? Why did we have Brexit? We had Brexit because a whole area of British society, you might call it the urban working class, has been ignored and abused by the political class in all its party affiliations, left, right, and centre, for decades and decades and decades. It didn't matter who you voted for, the same things were happening. And there's a reason for that I can go into on another day. And therefore, this Brexit vote, which was a in-out yes-no, which didn't have to go through a political party, was the perfect opportunity for that ignored, abused great area of the British population to have its voice heard.
But if they were so mind-controlled, though, they wouldn't have done that, would they?
No, hold on a second.
I'm just putting it out there. Okay.
You're putting it out there, right? That referendum was never meant to happen. It was offered by Cameron to offset the growth of UKIP. And he thought that when he came to the next election, he would be in another coalition with the Liberal Democrats who would block it. And he'd say, I wanted a referendum, really, but the Liberal Democrats won't go into government if we do that. Unfortunately for him, ironically, he did win outright and therefore was forced to have the referendum. And the vote went absolutely against the political class. And they were shocked because they thought that no one would ever turn against them, because all you have to do is frighten the unwashed masses to death with Godzilla will attack London the day after the Brexit vote.
The public were free to do what they did. I mean, we can debate this round and round, it sounds like, all night, and we haven't got the time. Hold on a second. Okay.
There's a next stage to this. So yes, because of a series of events they didn't expect to happen, there was the opportunity of the Brexit vote. And within the first hour of that Brexit result being announced, I was sitting here in the same chair. I wrote on the internet, this is just the start, because the political class and the European dark suits who've never seen a ballot box in their life are not going to let this go quietly or easily. And now we're seeing this coalition between the political class in Britain that don't want us to leave the European Union, despite the referendum, and the dark suit class in Brussels that wants the same outcome, who are making it more and more and more difficult. And now we're coming to exactly what I said would happen, the pressure for a second referendum to overturn it. This whole European Union is something that goes back at least to the 1920s. It goes back to the Warburg banking family. It goes back to the aristocracy families of Europe, like Otto von Habsburg. This whole idea of creating a European centralized dictatorship to dictate from a central point to the entirety of Europe.
Or indeed creating something, and we don't have time. We did go into this on the podcast, but it's my fault for starting it. But all I can say is that, looked at another way, There are those who would say that it's stopped us from having more conflict, it's helped us to see the other person's point of view, and it's oiled the wheels of trade. Two ways to look at everything. You're hearing the views of David Icke. Got to take that break now here on Talk Radio. The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. Back in a sec. David Icke has a book out at the moment, and he also is going on a big speaking tour. Dublin next week, like we said, and virtually everywhere else. But I'll give you the address of David's website at the back end of this. We won't trouble ourselves with that now. So, David, you've been very good and said that you're going to try and tackle some of these questions that I've had in. Now, look, when I asked for questions on Twitter before we started doing this, recording this, obviously, we got quite a lot of stuff, like one saying, was Mr. Spoon and the Suit Dragon based on true events, and is the moon really made of cheese? Which is one. Is David Icke mad? Is another one. So you get, and like I was saying at the top of this,
they're idiots, man.
Well,
idiots.
One third of the questions.
Idiots.
Well, yeah,
they haven't got two brain cells to rub together, and they have absolutely no self-respect.
Well, no, they would
ask stupid questions like that.
Well, they would think
some questions from intelligent people.
Well, I know they would think that they have a sense of humour. I think a lot of people would disagree with that. But the point that I'm making with that,
freedom of speech.
Well, yeah, there's your freedom of speech for you. But
I defend their right to say it, but they're idiots.
Hold on. Well, okay, that's you said that, and that's fine. But what I'm illustrating here,
that's what freedom of speech is about.
Is that if I'd done that, if we'd had Twitter, if we'd had Facebook, if we'd had social media for good, bad, or indifferent 20 years ago, and we were able to do that and ask for questions, then we'd have got a lot more frivolous questions like, "Are you mad?" Than we got tonight. 2/3 of the questions actually make a lot of sense. So let's get into them. Let's start here then. Do you think, David, still that global warming is a hoax as the sea ice disappears in the Arctic and billions of gallons of melted ice pour off Greenland along with the melting permafrost all over Siberia and Alaska, releasing methane, says Michael. He has a point, doesn't he?
Well, the answer to that question is yes, I do. But to respond to it in any credible way would take a long, long time. But there's a book just come out, which I've been reading recently. Basically, it's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming or Climate Change. I do recommend that people read that because with enormous detail, it takes the whole thing apart. But yes, I do believe that, absolutely.
Okay, and despite the fact that we've had research released in this last week saying that temperatures are going to, we've had a little bit of a blip, but temperatures are going to inexorably rise in the coming years. We're going to have a hot period. Howard,
in the 1970s, they were saying we were going into a global cooling. We've had scandal after scandal of revelations of the climate data being manipulated. We've had climate models, which basically, what's a computer model? You put crap in, you get crap out. Right, so we've had it over and over and over and over
My
again.
scientific friends would call that research. Derek asks,
yes, and they'd be wrong. If you don't put accurate information in, you don't get an accurate outcome out. And they've been proved wrong again and again and again with what's happened since the turn of the millennium. What they said was happened. It's not happened at all in terms of temperature rises.
I hear what you say, even in the light of a massively hot summer with temperatures up to 38 degrees in the southeast of England and potentially more hot weather to come. But let's park that there.
So what happened in 1976 when we had that fantastic summer? And they're still talking about global cooling. What was about in 1959 when we had a fantastically hot summer? You know, the temperatures were hotter during the medieval warm period, about 1,000 years ago. Well, I mean, what caused that? Turbocharged handcarts? I mean, do the research. That's what I say to people. This is the whole thing about what we were talking earlier, Howard. Let's put into the public arena what the scientists, the mainstream scientists say, the song sheet scientists, as I call them, and let's put into the public arena what increasing numbers of other scientists are saying, which actually doesn't make sense. And then people can make their own mind up. But when you have people like the BBC saying some years ago, the science is now settled, so we're not going to have people on questioning it anymore, then you are going down a very this dark road that I'm talking about.
You do hear people on questioning it. I've had somebody on here only very recently questioning it. But we have to say that there are more people accepting what scientists around the world are saying. There is a famous scientist in Texas who I had on this show who talks about the weirding of our weather increasingly. There are more of those people than people putting the other view. But let's go to something else. There are people, and you must have come...
How do you know that? How do you know that when these other scientists don't get the ability to have their voices heard?
Well, they have access to all the same platforms that you have access to, don't they?
Well, they don't have access to the mainstream media where most people get their information from. They don't.
Okay, let's move to something else.
A lot of people... You say you've interviewed someone, but I mean, you're not the BBC 10 o'clock news, are you? You're not Newsnight. It's these really mainstream of mainstream.
I'm very pleased we're not. I wear that as a badge of honour, David Icke. Now, look, let's move on to something else, because I've got loads of questions here, and I want to get to, a measure of them. Derek asks, and one of the problems is that when you go into the fields that you've been into over the years, people think that you are a repository of knowledge about all things. But I'm going to ask it anyway, because it's a question that's worth asking, whatever. Derek asks, can you ask David Icke, what was the Great Pyramid of Giza's true purpose? Now, there's a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of research recently. They discovered a new bit of it, a new chamber of it. It may be some kind of power generator. They don't quite know, but they're trying to find out. Have you ever had any thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've talked to quite a few people over the years who've done a lot of research into that whole Giza pyramid and what it was really there for. I've been inside it. The idea that it was built as a burial chamber is ludicrous, to go to those lengths for a burial chamber for one pharaoh. I mean, it's just crazy. But what I found interesting recently is that there was some scientific study came out pointing out the extraordinary electromagnetic properties inside the pyramid, particularly because of the way it's structured inside. And this would absolutely fit with what a number of people I've spoken to over the years who've really gone into this in great detail. They believe it was some kind of power generator, so some kind of, if you like, transformer that could take atmospheric energy from the electromagnetic field of the planet and turn it into some kind of usable power.
Or indeed a giant battery is what they've been saying recently.
Yeah, that's something like that and more is what I would go down. Because you see, this is the point about history, is that people believe that, because this is what's pounded out all the time, is that the human race in its knowledge has only ever gone forward. It's never been at a high level and then fallen from that level. And I say to people today, if something happened, if there was some catastrophe happened, that meant we no longer had electricity or oil, what kind of society will we live in very, very, very quickly? Nothing like the one we live in now. And it's very clear when you do study history that there have been periods when there's been very great knowledge. And that knowledge has then been lost. Therefore, in some of these ancient societies where they built structures that we would struggle to build today, and scientists and historians and all these people look at them and say, how did they do that? How did they move these stones of hundreds of tons and all the rest of it? I saw a place in just above Cusco in Peru. It's a very famous place. Sacsayhuaman is one way they pronounce it. And there are these enormous, absolutely enormous stones that are fitted together like a dry stone wall. You can get a cigarette paper between them. It's incredible.
But how did they do that without the kind of technology that we have now? And in fact, a lot of the technology we have now is not capable of doing those things. I mean, you and I can agree on this, that we have a lot to learn for the future
what I'm
from
saying
the past.
Is history shows that knowledge is lost as well as gained.
But, we're a bit more broad-minded these days, and we're beginning to relearn some of this stuff, I think, and I hope from what I see. Claire asks this. And you must have thought about this. I've probably asked you about this in the past. Right. Because you've said a lot of things, some of which could potentially have brought you lawsuits, but they didn't. But they brought you enemies. Claire wants to know, Are you ever surprised that you haven't been bumped off and nobody's tried to?
Well, no, I'm not, for a number of reasons, some of them deep and some of them less deep. And the less deep one is that if something happened to me now, given the information I've been putting out and given the if you like, reputation I have for doing this, then it would be terribly counterproductive. I'm sitting here looking at about 20 books packed with information. I mean, they would be right in the public attention if anything happened to me. Well, what was the guy saying and all this stuff? So it would give a massive boost to the circulation of this information and to get people to think, well, hold on a minute, maybe he was saying something. And so it's counterproductive from that point of view.
So do you think that if anything happened to you, you would be seen as a bit of a martyr?
Well, nothing's going to happen to me. I want to do what I want to do, not be a martyr. I don't want a statue. I don't want to be a martyr. I don't want a round of applause. I want to circulate information to the best of my ability for absolutely as long as I can. But the way that the authorities kind of respond to you is not to kill you, because that, for reasons I've described and others, would be counterproductive. It's to stop you being circulated and, for a long time, to have you the center of public ridicule. Well, that's starting to die down now. I mean, you can only say someone's mad for so many times before it's no longer news, and people are starting to listen. So the only way they can respond to me now is to stop my information circulating as best they can.
All right,
but that's a problem, because the genie's out of the bottle now, and I ain't going away.
Quick final question from me. Okay. And it's an important one, and maybe I've just missed the answer to this, so you can fill me in about it, and right. Please feel free to. You started your own alternative organisation to counter the mainstream media, which is what you've been telling me we need, another voice against the MSM. I think was it called the People's Voice? What happened? Yeah. What happened to it?
It didn't work. It didn't work because a lot of people came through the door to make it not work, and eventually you couldn't get advertising for it. Advertisers didn't want to know, and so it didn't work. But a lot of good things were done there, and But what do? Do you give up? No, you try again, and you're going to work towards something similar, but coming from a different angle, which will be much more workable.
So you're relaunching, but different.
No, I'm not saying we're going to relaunch. I'm saying we're working towards it with some people. But where it goes is where it goes. And that was not me in the sense of it was my station, whatever. I was a part of it, yeah. But my work has always been what I do individually. That's my role.
Do you feel you failed with that, David? Did you fail? Do you think you failed with that?
Well, what's failure? Tell me what failure is.
God knows. I've been asking myself for years. I'm just wondering what your thoughts about that are.
Well, I'll give you one definition of failure. Not trying.
Yeah.
Not trying.
We can agree with that. A great sage once said, I wish I could remember who it was, that failing is not going down, but failing is staying down. It's brilliant quote, isn't it?
But it wasn't about going down. It was about having a go, and it didn't work. We got a massive amount of information out in the period that it was running. But you have a go, and
but if the message was so strong, it should have flown, shouldn't it?
Well, not if you can't get advertising to pay the bills. You can't. I mean, tell me how ITV would keep doing the 10 o'clock news and all its programs if he couldn't get advertising.
Understood, David. We're out of time, I'm afraid. My producer's shaking her fist at me now, and you don't mess with Cass. So thank you very much, David. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. It's davidicke.com, isn't it?
It's davidicke.com. Yeah, the news from a different angle every day. Constantly updated.
I know, I see. David, have a good night and good luck in Dublin with the next stage on your tour. You take care. Thank you.
There's a lot of interest in Ireland. I'm looking forward to it. See you soon. Bye.
Take care. David Icke.